Sometimes the cruelest thing a person can lose is not a home, but the feeling that they belong anywhere at all. The little girl reached for the basket of honey cakes with both hands and a hopeful smile. Aloan Hartwell smiled back and carefully offered one to her. For a brief second, everything felt normal. Then the child's mother stepped forward. No, the word landed harder than winter wind. She pulled her daughter back immediately. We are leaving. The little girl looked confused. But Mama, now. Without another glance, the woman guided her daughter into the crowd gathered around Frost Hollow's Winter Moon Festival. The child twisted once to look back at Aloan before disappearing among the lanterns and decorations. Aloan remained standing beside her small wooden stall, the untouched basket still balanced in her hands. Around her, laughter filled the village square. Music drifted through the cold evening air. Families gathered beneath strings of glowing lanterns while merchants called out cheerful greetings. Everywhere she looked, people were celebrating together. Everyone except her. Slowly, Aloan lowered the basket onto the table she had spent 3 days preparing. Honey cakes, fresh bread, dried apple pastries. Every item baked by hand. Every item untouched. Not a single sale. Not because the food was poor. The villagers knew her baking was excellent. They simply preferred not to buy from her. Frost Hollow had spent years turning Aloan into a story. An unlucky girl. A cursed girl. A girl best avoided. No one remembered exactly how the rumors had started. They only remembered repeating them. Her father had died during a brutal winter when she was 16. Her mother passed away 3 years later after a long illness. After that, misfortune seemed to find convenient ways of attaching itself to her name. A failed crop. A collapsed shed. A missing horse. Every problem eventually became part of the same story. And stories, once accepted, became difficult to escape. The festival continued around her. Several villagers walked past the stall without even pretending to look. Others glanced briefly before turning away. Aloan tried not to let it hurt anymore. Some days she succeeded. Tonight was not one of those days. As darkness deepened, snow began falling gently from the sky. White flakes drifted between lantern lights and settled across rooftops. One by one, merchants packed their goods and returned home. Aloan remained until the very end, hoping someone might stop. No one did. Eventually, she began gathering her unsold food. You should not waste your time with these events. The voice belonged to old Mrs. Whitaker. The elderly woman paused beside the stall, her expression carrying genuine sympathy. People can be foolish. Aloan forced a smile. I know. Mrs. Whitaker hesitated. You are a good girl, Aloan. Then she quietly added, do not let them convince you otherwise. Those simple words almost hurt more than the rejection itself, because kindness had become so rare. Aloan thanked her softly and watched the older woman disappear into the snowy night. Soon she was alone. The festival lights still glowed behind her as she carried the basket through the edge of town toward her cottage beyond the forest. Snow crunched beneath her boots. The cold air stung her cheeks. Yet none of it felt as cold as the emptiness she carried inside. She wondered what it would feel like to belong somewhere. To walk into a room and know people were happy to see her. To have someone waiting at home. Someone who cared whether she returned. The thought made her chest ache. The forest greeted her with silence. Tall pine trees stretched into darkness on both sides of the narrow path. Snow gathered on branches overhead. The village sounds gradually faded behind her until only the whisper of winter remained. Then she heard it. A faint cry. Aloan stopped immediately. The sound came again. Soft. Weak. Almost lost beneath the wind. She looked toward the trees. Another cry followed. Somewhere deeper in the forest. Most people would have continued walking. The night was cold. The woods could be dangerous after dark. But Aloan had spent enough years feeling abandoned to recognize the sound of something alone. Without hesitation, she left the path and followed the noise between the snow-covered pines. The lantern in her hand cast trembling golden light across the ground. The cry grew weaker. Closer. Aloan carefully pushed past a low branch and stepped into a small clearing. Then she froze. Beneath an ancient pine tree, partially covered by fresh snow, lay the most beautiful creature she had ever seen. A silver fox. Its fur shimmered like moonlight across frozen water. One slender leg rested awkwardly beneath its body. Snowflakes settled across its coat without melting. For a moment, Aloan simply stared. The creature looked almost unreal, like something from an old story told beside winter fires. Slowly, the fox lifted its head. Silver eyes met hers across the clearing. Aloan felt her breath catch. There was intelligence in those eyes. Awareness. Something far deeper than instinct. Neither moved. Snow continued drifting around them. The entire forest seemed to hold its breath. Then, to her complete surprise, the fox took a single step toward her before its legs gave way beneath it. As the creature collapsed gently into the snow, Aloan dropped to her knees beside it without a second thought. The fox should have been afraid of her. Any wild creature would have been. Yet as Aloan knelt in the snow, the silver fox did not try to run. Its breathing was shallow. Its body trembled from cold and exhaustion. But those remarkable silver eyes never left her face. For a long moment, neither moved. Snow drifted quietly between them while moonlight filtered through the pine branches overhead. Aloan slowly extended one gloved hand. "I am not going to hurt you," she whispered. The fox blinked once. The movement felt strangely deliberate, as though it understood every word. Carefully, she examined its injured leg. The limb seemed weak rather than wounded. There was no sign of blood, no trap, no visible injury. Yet the fox could barely remain standing. Whatever had happened to it, the creature had pushed itself far beyond its limits. "You should not be out here alone," Aloan murmured. The irony of her own words almost made her smile. The fox lowered its head slightly. Snow gathered along its silver fur. A fresh gust of wind swept through the clearing. The temperature dropped further. Aloan knew that if she left the creature there, it might not survive the night. The realization settled instantly in her heart. The decision was already made. "You are coming home with me." Slowly, she slipped her arms beneath the fox. The moment she touched it, a strange sensation traveled through her gloves. Warmth. Not ordinary warmth. Something deeper. The feeling vanished almost immediately, leaving her uncertain whether she had imagined it. The fox tensed briefly. Then, to her surprise, it relaxed completely, allowing itself to be lifted. "Thank you," Aloan said softly. Cradling the animal against her coat, she began the walk back through the forest. The fox was heavier than she expected, yet she never considered putting it down. Every few minutes, she glanced at the creature. Each time she found the silver eyes watching her. Not with fear, not with suspicion, with curiosity. The sight was oddly comforting. By the time her cottage came into view, snow covered her shoulders and hair. Warm light glowed from the windows. Never before had the little house looked so welcoming. Aloan hurried inside and shut the door against the winter storm. Heat from the fireplace immediately filled the room. The fox stirred in her arms. "Better already," she said. She spread several blankets beside the fire and gently lowered the creature onto them. For a moment it simply lay there, watching the dancing flames. Then it released a slow breath and rested its head on the blankets. Aloan removed her coat and hung it near the door. "Stay there. I will be right back." Moving around the cottage, she gathered supplies. Warm water, clean cloths, dried herbs, honey. The simple remedies her mother had taught her years ago. As she worked, she occasionally glanced toward the fireplace. The fox never moved. It followed her with its eyes, tracking every step she took. When she returned with the basin of warm water, the creature remained calm. This might help. She carefully soaked a cloth and gently pressed it against the weak leg. The fox flinched slightly, but did not pull away. "I know," Aloan whispered. "Just a little longer." The treatment lasted nearly half an hour. Throughout the entire process, the fox never growled or snapped. It simply watched her with quiet patience. The more time Aloan spent near the creature, the stranger it seemed. Not because it looked unusual, because it felt unusual. There was an intelligence in its gaze that unsettled her in ways she could not explain. Eventually, she placed a bowl of fresh water nearby. The fox ignored it at first. Then, after studying her face for several seconds, it slowly leaned forward and drank. Relief flooded through her. "Good." She smiled. "That is very good." Later, after preparing a simple supper for herself, Aloan found her attention constantly drifting toward the fireplace. Several times she caught herself talking aloud, describing the festival, complaining about the villagers, mentioning small memories from her childhood. The fox listened quietly to every word. It felt ridiculous, yet somehow less ridiculous than sitting alone in silence. Outside, the storm intensified. Wind rattled the windows. Snow buried the path leading back to Frost Hollow. Inside, however, the cottage felt warm and peaceful, safer than it had in years. As the evening stretched into night, exhaustion finally began catching up with her. Aloan settled into the worn chair beside the fire and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. Across from her, the silver fox rested on its blankets. Firelight shimmered across its coat, making the creature appear almost unreal, like something borrowed from a dream. Her eyelids grew heavier. The last thing she remembered before sleep claimed her was the sight of those silver eyes reflecting the flames. Hours later, long after midnight, the fire burned low. Shadows filled the cottage. The fox slowly opened its eyes. No trace of weakness remained in its gaze. Rising carefully to its feet, it looked around the small room before turning toward the sleeping woman curled in the chair. For a long moment, the creature simply watched her. Then something remarkable happened. The fox stepped closer and quietly settled beside her chair instead of returning to the fireplace. Outside, the storm continued through the night. But inside the cottage, neither of them was alone anymore. The next morning, Aloan woke to find the chair beside her empty. For one alarming second, she thought the fox had disappeared. Then she noticed a silver shape sitting quietly near the window. Sunlight spilled across its fur, turning it into a living reflection of winter itself. Relief washed through her so suddenly that she almost laughed. "You are still here." The fox turned its head toward her. Those silver eyes met hers immediately. As always, the gaze felt unusually aware, almost as though it had been waiting for her to wake. Outside, Frost Hollow disappeared beneath fresh snow. Inside, the cottage felt warmer than it had in years. Aloan prepared breakfast and set a small bowl of water near the fireplace. This time, the fox approached without hesitation. It drank calmly while she worked. The sight made her smile. Small victories mattered, especially when life offered so few of them. The days that followed settled into an unexpected rhythm. Each morning, Aloan left for the village to sell herbs or gather supplies. Each evening, she returned to find the fox waiting. Somehow it always seemed to know the exact moment she arrived. More than once, she opened the door to discover the creature already standing near the entrance, as if listening for her footsteps. "You missed me," she teased one evening. The fox blinked slowly. Aloan laughed. "I will take that as a yes." Night after night, the bond between them deepened. On the third evening, the fox finally accepted food directly from her hand. On the fifth, it moved its blankets closer to her chair. By the seventh, it no longer seemed interested in sleeping near the fireplace at all. Instead, it preferred staying wherever Aloan happened to be. If she read a book, it rested nearby. If she sorted herbs, it watched quietly from the corner of the table. If she sat by the window during a storm, the fox settled beside her chair as though standing guard. The loneliness that had followed her for years began fading in ways she barely noticed at first. The cottage no longer felt empty. The silence no longer felt heavy. Some evenings, she found herself talking for hours. She told the fox stories about her childhood, about learning to bake with her mother, about helping her father repair fences during the summer, about dreams she once had before life taught her to expect disappointment. The fox listened to every word. It never interrupted, never judged, never looked away. "You are probably the best listener in Frost Hollow," she admitted one snowy evening. The fox rested its head against her knee. The simple gesture nearly broke her heart. Nobody had shown her that kind of affection in years. One night, after returning from town, Aloan sat quietly beside the fire. Her mood was darker than usual. Earlier that day, she had overheard several villagers discussing her again. Some things never changed. The old rumors remained alive. So did the distance people kept between themselves and her. For a long time, she stared into the flames without speaking. The fox approached silently and settled beside her. "Do you ever wonder what it feels like to belong somewhere?" she asked softly. "To have people who are happy when you walk into a room?" The fox lifted its head. Aloan smiled sadly. "I suppose you do not worry about things like that." Yet even as she said the words, she was not entirely convinced. The creature seemed to understand more than any animal should. Much more. That night, tears gathered unexpectedly in her eyes. Not from one particular memory. From all of them. Years of loneliness. Years of being overlooked. Years of pretending it did not hurt. Before she could wipe the tears away, something warm brushed against her hand. The fox. It had moved closer. Its silver eyes remained fixed on her face. Not curious, concerned. Eloan stared in disbelief. Then she laughed quietly through the tears. You really do understand, do you not? The fox rested its head against her lap. For several minutes, neither moved. Outside, snow drifted gently through the darkness. Inside, the fire crackled softly. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Eloan felt completely safe. As the days passed, she began noticing other strange things. Birds gathered near the cottage more often. Deer wandered closer to the property without fear. Even the harsh winter weather seemed less severe around the house. Small patches of green occasionally appeared where snow should have remained untouched. Eloan could not explain any of it. Yet whenever something unusual happened, she inevitably found the fox nearby watching with those mysterious silver eyes. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after finding the creature beneath the pine tree, Eloan returned home, carrying supplies from town. As usual, she expected to see the fox waiting at the door. Instead, the cottage stood silent. Empty. Her smile vanished immediately. Hello. No silver shape appeared. No familiar eyes greeted her. A strange fear tightened around her heart. Then she noticed something lying on the floor near the doorway. One single silver strand of fur. And beyond the back window, fresh tracks leading toward the dark forest. Winter settled over Frost Hollow like a long, quiet dream. Day after day, snow blanketed the rooftops. Frost painted delicate patterns across cottage windows. The world beyond Eloan's door seemed frozen in place. Yet inside her little home, something had begun to change. For the first time in years, she no longer dreaded the evenings. Nearly 3 weeks had passed since she found the silver fox beneath the pine tree. The creature had recovered completely. Its strength had returned. If it wished to disappear into the forest, nothing prevented it. Yet every morning it remained beside the fireplace. Every evening it waited for her return. The realization brought Eloan a happiness she rarely allowed herself to acknowledge. One afternoon, after spending several hours gathering supplies in Frost Hollow, she walked home through falling snow. The village had been particularly unpleasant that day. 2 women had lowered their voices when she entered the bakery. A shopkeeper who greeted everyone else warmly barely looked at her. By the time she reached the forest path, exhaustion weighed heavier than the basket in her hands. The moment her cottage appeared through the trees, however, something inside her relaxed. Warm light glowed through the windows. Home. As soon as she opened the door, a familiar silver shape appeared. The fox was already waiting beside the entrance. Eloan laughed softly. You always know when I am coming. The fox approached immediately, not cautiously, not curiously, as though greeting her had become the most natural thing in the world. I missed you too. The creature blinked. Eloan smiled. She had begun interpreting those blinks as entire conversations. Later that evening she sat beside the fire with a blanket draped across her shoulders. The fox rested near her feet. Outside, wind whispered through the trees. Inside, warmth filled every corner of the room. For several minutes neither moved. Then Eloan spoke quietly. Do you know something funny? The fox lifted its head. You are the only one who waits for me. The words hung in the air longer than she expected. Nobody in the village notices when I leave. Nobody notices when I come back. A sad smile touched her lips. But you do. The fox rose immediately and crossed the room. Without hesitation, it rested its head against her knee. Eloan froze. Emotion tightened unexpectedly in her chest. See, she whispered. You always know exactly when to do that. She gently ran her fingers through its silver fur. The creature closed its eyes. Trust had become effortless between them. Days passed. Their routine deepened. Every morning Eloan spoke to the fox while preparing breakfast. Every evening she shared stories beside the fire. Sometimes she read old books aloud simply because she enjoyed having someone listen. Other times she talked about things she had never told another person. The fox never interrupted, never judged, never looked away. One snowy night, while flames danced softly in the fireplace, Eloan found herself speaking about something she usually avoided. When I was younger, I wanted to travel. The fox immediately focused on her. Not far, just far enough to see something different. She stared into the fire. I used to imagine cities, mountains, oceans. Her smile faded slightly. Then life happened. Silence settled around them. After my parents died, everything became smaller. She lowered her gaze. Dreams too. The fox remained perfectly still. Listening. Always listening. Aloan hesitated. Then she spoke the thought she had carried for years. Sometimes I think nobody would notice if I disappeared. The words escaped before she could stop them. The room suddenly felt very quiet. The fox reacted instantly. It rose so quickly that the movement startled her. For the first time since she found it, genuine emotion flashed across those silver eyes. Not curiosity, not concern, something deeper, stronger. The creature stepped forward and pressed itself firmly against her. Aloan blinked in surprise. Hey. Her voice softened. I was only talking. But the fox did not move away. It remained beside her, almost stubbornly, as though refusing to allow her to believe those words. Tears gathered unexpectedly in her eyes. Not because she felt sad, because she realized how desperately she needed someone to disagree. A quiet laugh escaped her. You really do understand me, do not you? The fox finally relaxed. Its head settled across her lap. Aloan rested one hand gently against its neck. Outside, snow continued falling through the darkness. Inside, something broken inside her began healing. For the first time in years, she did not feel invisible. She did not feel forgotten. She felt seen. Late that night, after Aloan had fallen asleep in the chair beside the fire, the fox remained awake. Moonlight spilled through the windows, illuminating the room in silver light. Slowly, the creature lifted its head and looked toward the forest. Far beyond the trees, distant lights flickered against the darkness. Lanterns, several of them, moving steadily through the mountains. The fox immediately rose to its feet. Every trace of warmth vanished from its expression. It watched the approaching lights for a long moment. Then it looked back toward the sleeping woman beside the fireplace. For the first time, uncertainty appeared in those silver eyes. Somewhere beyond the valley, people were searching, and sooner or later, they would find what they were looking for. The cottage had never felt so empty. Aloan stood frozen near the doorway, staring at the single silver strand resting on the wooden floor. Outside the back window, fresh tracks disappeared into the snow-covered forest. For several seconds, she could not move. Her mind refused to accept what her eyes already knew. The fox was gone. No, she whispered. The words sounded small inside the silent cottage. Setting down her basket, she rushed outside. Cold wind immediately wrapped around her. Snow crunched beneath her boots as she followed the tracks beyond the edge of the property. The fading daylight painted the forest in pale shades of blue and gray. Every few yards she expected to see a flash of silver fur between the trees. Every few yards she expected relief. It never came. The tracks continued deeper into the woods. Aloan followed them for nearly half a mile before they began disappearing beneath fresh snowfall. Eventually, even the last visible print vanished entirely. She stopped beneath a cluster of ancient pines and listened. Nothing. No movement. No familiar cry. No sign that the fox had ever been there at all. A strange ache settled in her chest. It was ridiculous, she told herself. The fox was a wild animal. Wild animals left. That was what they did. She had known from the beginning that this day would come. Yet knowing something and being prepared for it were two completely different things. As darkness approached, Aloan finally returned home. The cottage greeted her with silence. The blankets near the fireplace remained neatly arranged. The water bowl sat untouched. Everything looked exactly the same. Everything except the one thing that mattered. That evening she prepared supper out of habit. Halfway through the meal she realized she had automatically set aside a second portion. Her stomach tightened. Without thinking, she carried the extra food to the fireplace. Then she stopped. There was nobody waiting for it. Slowly, she set the bowl aside. The realization hurt more than she expected. The next morning she woke before sunrise and immediately looked toward the fireplace. Empty. Disappointment arrived so quickly it almost took her breath away. Throughout the day, she found herself glancing toward the door whenever a branch scraped the roof or the wind shifted outside. Each time hope flared. Each time it faded again. By the third day, Frost Hollow had returned to normal. Villagers still avoided her. Snow still covered the roads. Life continued exactly as it always had. Yet something inside Aloan felt different. Quieter. Lonelier. She had grown accustomed to having someone waiting for her. Someone who listened. Someone who made the cottage feel less empty. Now the silence seemed larger than before. That evening she sat alone beside the fire. The same chair. The same room. Yet nothing felt the same. Her eyes drifted toward the window. Snow fell gently beyond the glass. "I hope you are safe," she whispered. The words escaped before she could stop them. A sad smile touched her lips. "Wherever you are." The fire crackled softly. No answer came. Later that night, unable to sleep, Eloan opened one of her favorite books. She managed only a few pages before realizing she was no longer reading. Her thoughts kept returning to the fox. Had it recovered completely? Had it found shelter? Did it remember her at all? The questions lingered long after midnight. Eventually, exhaustion pulled her into sleep. The dream came almost immediately. She stood within a vast hall illuminated by hundreds of candles. Snow drifted beyond towering windows. Marble floors reflected golden light. The place felt impossibly beautiful, ancient, familiar. At the far end of the hall stood a man dressed entirely in black. Tall, motionless, waiting. Eloan could not see his face clearly, yet her heart recognized him instantly. The silver eyes gave him away. The same eyes she had seen every evening beside the fireplace. The same eyes that had watched her from beneath the pine tree. The stranger took a step toward her. "Eloan." Her breath caught. His voice sounded distant and warm at the same time. "Find me." Before she could answer, the dream shattered. Eloan woke abruptly. Moonlight filled the cottage. Her pulse raced. For several moments she remained still, trying to understand what she had seen. Then a sound echoed outside. Not the wind. Not a branch. Horse hooves. She rose immediately and moved toward the window. Through the darkness, she spotted distant lantern lights weaving between the trees. Riders. Several of them. They were searching the forest. And somehow, deep inside, Eloan knew they were not searching for her. They were searching for the silver fox. The riders remained in the forest for 2 more days. Eloan saw their lanterns several times through the trees after sunset. Sometimes she heard distant horse hooves. Sometimes she caught glimpses of dark figures moving among the pines. They never approached her cottage directly, yet their presence unsettled her. More than once she considered telling someone in the village. Each time she changed her mind. She could not explain why. Deep down, she already knew who they were searching for, and she could not bring herself to help them. By the 3rd evening, the snowstorm returned. Thick clouds swallowed the moon. Strong winds swept across the valley, rattling windows and bending tree branches. Eloan sat alone beside the fireplace, trying unsuccessfully to focus on her book. Every few minutes her gaze drifted toward the door. It had become a habit she could not break. Part of her still expected to see a flash of silver fur waiting outside. Part of her still hoped. "You should have stayed," she whispered softly into the empty room. The fire crackled in response. Nothing else. As the storm intensified, sleep became impossible. Near midnight, she finally set aside her book and walked to the window. Snow swirled wildly through the darkness. Visibility had nearly disappeared. Then something caught her eye. A shape moving beyond the tree line. Eloan froze. For a moment she thought it was another rider. Then the figure stumbled. Her heart immediately recognized what her eyes could not yet see. She grabbed her lantern and rushed outside. The cold struck her instantly. Wind pulled at her coat while snow blinded her vision. Yet she continued forward. The shape appeared again between the trees. Silver. Familiar. No. Eloan hurried through knee-deep snow toward the forest. The silver fox emerged from the storm only a few yards ahead. It looked exhausted, far weaker than when she had first found it beneath the pine tree. Relief and worry collided inside her chest. "You came back." The fox lifted its head. Their eyes met. For one heartbreaking second, Eloan thought she saw something like apology in its gaze. Then the creature collapsed into the snow. "Hey." She dropped beside it immediately. "Hey, stay with me." The fox's breathing remained shallow. Its silver coat was coated in frost. Whatever had happened during the past few days had clearly taken a toll. Without hesitation, Eloan gathered the creature into her arms and carried it home. The walk back felt longer than ever before. Wind howled outside. Snow pounded against the cottage walls. Inside, however, warmth waited. Eloan placed the fox beside the fireplace and wrapped it in blankets. "You are not leaving again," she said firmly. "Not tonight." The fox watched her quietly. Hours passed. Eloan remained beside it the entire time. She refreshed the fire, replaced blankets, prepared warm water. Yet despite everything she did, the creature seemed strangely distant, as though its strength was fading in ways she could not understand. Near dawn, exhaustion finally overcame her. She rested her head against the edge of the chair and closed her eyes. When she awoke, sunlight streamed through the windows. The storm had passed. For a few peaceful seconds, she forgot everything. Then she looked toward the fireplace. The blankets were empty. Aloan shot to her feet. No panic surged through her. She searched every corner of the cottage. The kitchen, the storage room, the porch. Nothing. The fox had vanished again. Her heart sank. Then she noticed something unusual. A black coat draped neatly across the chair beside the fireplace. It definitely had not been there before. Aloan stared. Slowly, she turned toward the far side of the room. A man stood near the window. Tall, broad-shouldered, motionless. Dark hair brushed the collar of his black clothing. Morning sunlight illuminated pale skin and striking features that seemed almost unreal after weeks of solitude. Yet none of that captured her attention. Only the eyes mattered. Silver. Exactly the same silver she had watched across countless evenings beside the fire. Aloan could not breathe. The man slowly turned toward her. For a moment neither spoke. Every memory from the past several weeks rushed through her mind. The forest, the snow, the fireplace, the silent companionship, the impossible understanding. Suddenly, every mystery fit together. Every unanswered question found its place. "It was you," she whispered. The man held her gaze. A faint sadness touched his expression. "Yes." His voice was calm, familiar in a way that made no sense. "I am sorry for leaving." Aloan stared at him. Part of her wanted answers. Part of her wanted to know whether she was still dreaming. Yet another part of her simply felt relief. The strange emptiness she had carried for days vanished almost instantly. The man lowered his head slightly. "My name is Cashin Voss." The room seemed to grow very quiet. Outside, sunlight glittered across fresh snow. Inside, Aloan felt her entire world begin to change. Then Cashin looked directly into her eyes and said the words that would alter everything she thought she knew. "The people searching these woods are searching for me." For several long moments after Cashin revealed his name, neither of them spoke. Morning sunlight filtered through the frost-covered windows, illuminating the cottage in soft gold. Aloan remained standing beside the fireplace, trying to reconcile two impossible truths. The silver fox she had cared for every night sat before her no longer. In his place stood a man. Yet somehow, when she looked into his silver eyes, the difference felt far smaller than it should have. Those eyes had listened to her fears. Those eyes had waited for her at the door every evening. Those eyes had been with her through the loneliest winter of her life. "You are really him," she finally whispered. Cashin nodded. "I am." Aloan sank slowly into her chair. 100 questions crowded her thoughts, but only one escaped. "Why did you come back?" Cashin glanced toward the fireplace. The answer did not come immediately. "Because leaving was harder than I expected." Aloan blinked. Of all the responses she imagined, that was not one of them. A faint smile touched his face. "I spent centuries believing strength meant carrying everything alone." His gaze drifted across the cottage. "Then I came here." Silence settled briefly between them. "And?" she asked softly. Cashin looked around the small room. The worn wooden table. The books stacked near the window. The chair beside the fire where she often sat reading aloud. Ordinary things. Yet his expression carried unexpected warmth. "For the first time in a very long time, I felt at peace." Aloan's heart tightened unexpectedly. Cashin continued. "No guards outside the door. No advisors waiting with reports. No expectations." A quiet laugh escaped him. "No king should envy a cottage." Aloan found herself smiling. "And yet you do." "I do." The honesty in his voice left no room for doubt. For a moment, neither looked away. Something shifted between them. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. Simply the realization that their connection had survived the truth. The fox was gone, yet the bond remained. Eventually, Aloan gathered enough courage to ask the question that mattered most. "Who are the writers?" Cashin's expression darkened slightly. He moved toward the window and stared into the forest beyond. "They serve Noctis Vale." "Then they are your allies." "Most of them." The answer immediately caught her attention. "Most." Cashin remained silent for several seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight she had never heard before. "Several weeks ago, I was betrayed by someone I trusted." Aloan watched him carefully. "Someone close to you?" He nodded. "Close enough to know my weaknesses." The room grew quiet. She suddenly understood why he spoke so little about himself. Some wounds left no visible scars. Is that how you ended up in the forest? Cashin turned toward her. Yes. He did not elaborate. He did not need to. The pain behind the answer said enough. Aloan lowered her eyes. I am sorry. A faint expression crossed his face. Surprise. As though he was unaccustomed to receiving sympathy. You have no reason to apologize. Maybe not. She offered a small smile. But I wanted to. Cashin studied her for a long moment. Then something in his expression softened. That is one of the reasons I came back. The words hung gently between them. Aloan felt warmth rise to her cheeks and quickly looked away. Outside, sunlight glittered across fresh snow. Inside, the cottage felt smaller than ever, yet somehow warmer. After a while, Cashin walked toward the bookshelf beside the window. His fingers brushed across several worn volumes. You read these aloud every evening. Aloan laughed quietly. You remember? He looked over his shoulder. I remember all of it. Her smile faded into something softer. The evenings by the fire. The conversations. The stories. None of it had belonged only to her imagination. He remembered too. There is something else you should know, Cashin said eventually. The seriousness in his voice returned. Aloan immediately straightened. What is it? Cashin stepped closer. The people searching for me will not stop. The warmth in the room seemed to dim slightly. Because of the betrayal? Because whoever arranged it still does not know whether I survived. Aloan felt unease settle in her stomach. And if they discover you are here? Cashin's silver eyes met hers. Then Frost Hollow may become involved in matters far larger than this village was ever meant to face. The words were calm, but their meaning was clear. The peaceful winter she had known was beginning to change. The world beyond the forest was moving closer. Yet strangely, fear was not the strongest emotion she felt. It was concern. Concern for him. Concern she never expected to feel for a stranger. Or perhaps he was no longer a stranger at all. Cashin seemed to sense the thought. You should know something, Aloan. She looked up. What? For a moment, the powerful ruler of Noctis Vale disappeared. In his place stood the same lonely soul who had once watched her from beside the fireplace. Finding you was the best thing that happened to me this winter. The cottage fell silent. Outside, snow drifted gently through the sunlight. Inside, neither of them spoke. Because some truths, once finally spoken aloud, needed no further explanation. 3 days later, Frost Hollow woke to unexpected visitors. Word spread through the village before sunrise. Riders had arrived from the north. Elegant carriages stood near the square. Well-dressed men and women moved through the streets, speaking quietly with village leaders. By mid-morning, nearly everyone had gathered outside to watch. Curiosity always traveled quickly in small towns. Aloan stood near the edge of the crowd, her coat pulled tightly against the winter air. Beside her, Cashin remained hidden from sight within the forest beyond the village. They had agreed it was safer that way, at least for now. The visitors introduced themselves as representatives of Noctis Vale. Their arrival transformed the atmosphere immediately. Even those who knew little about the distant kingdom recognized the name. Respect mixed with fascination. Questions spread through the crowd. Why had they come? What were they looking for? Then one of the officials stepped forward and addressed the gathering. We are searching for information regarding Lord Cashin Voss. The square fell silent. Aloan felt her pulse quicken. Our lord disappeared several weeks ago while traveling through the northern territories, the official continued. We have reason to believe someone in this region may have unknowingly assisted him. Murmurs erupted across the crowd. Villagers exchanged curious glances. Most appeared excited. Some looked nervous. A few looked openly hopeful at the possibility of reward. Then came the moment Aloan had feared. There is one resident whose name has appeared repeatedly during our inquiries, the official announced. Dozens of eyes immediately turned toward her. The familiar sensation returned. The same one she had carried for years. Being watched, judged, discussed. Aloan stood perfectly still. Aloan Hartwell. Her name echoed across the square. A whisper moved through the crowd. Of course it is her. Strange things always happen around that girl. She probably knows something. Aloan lowered her eyes. Some people never changed. Not even when the circumstances did. The official approached politely. Miss Hartwell, we simply wish to ask a few questions. Before she could answer, a voice emerged from somewhere within the crowd. She is nobody important. Several villagers nodded. Another voice followed. She lives alone in the woods. Nobody would trust her with anything valuable. The words should not have hurt. She had heard versions of them for years. Yet standing before the entire village made the familiar wounds feel fresh again. The crowd continued murmuring. People spoke about her as though she were not standing there at all, as though she were an object rather than a person. Then everything changed. A calm voice cut through the noise. Then every one of you failed to recognize what true worth looks like. Silence fell instantly. The crowd parted. Aloan turned. Cashin walked into the square without hurry. Snow drifted gently around him. Dark clothing contrasted sharply against the winter landscape. Yet it was not his appearance that captured attention. It was his presence. The entire atmosphere shifted the moment he arrived. Conversations died. People stepped aside instinctively. Even the officials from Noctis Vale straightened immediately. Several lowered their heads. "My lord." The title swept through the square like a wave. Shock appeared on dozens of faces. Villagers stared openly. Some looked confused. Others looked terrified that they might have spoken carelessly in front of someone far more important than they realized. Cashin ignored all of them. His attention remained fixed on Aloan. Slowly, he crossed the remaining distance between them. Every eye followed. The entire village watched. The entire world seemed to narrow into that single moment. Cashin stopped directly before her. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then he turned toward the crowd. Silver eyes swept across familiar faces. The same people who had ignored her stall at the festival. The same people who had whispered behind her back. The same people who had convinced themselves that her value depended upon their approval. "This woman sheltered me when she believed I was nothing more than an injured animal," Cashin said calmly. She expected no reward. She asked for nothing in return. The square remained silent. When I had no title, she showed kindness. When I had no power, she offered protection. When I had nothing to give, she still chose compassion. His voice never rose. It did not need to. Every word carried weight. Then came the moment nobody expected. Not the officials. Not the villagers. Not even Aloan herself. Cashin lowered himself onto one knee before her. A collective gasp swept through Frost Hollow. Several people looked completely stunned. Others appeared unable to believe what they were witnessing. The ruler of Noctis Vale knelt before the woman they had spent years dismissing. Cashin looked up at her. The silver eyes she first saw beneath the pine tree held the same warmth now. The same gratitude. The same quiet certainty. "Aloan Hartwell," he said softly, though the entire square heard every word. "The world taught you that you were insignificant. It was wrong." Emotion tightened her throat. Cashin extended his hand. "You saw worth where others saw none. Today they will finally see yours." Tears filled Aloan's eyes before she could stop them. Not because of the crowd. Not because of the attention. But because someone had finally chosen to stand beside her when everyone else had stepped away. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. And for the first time in her life, nobody in Frost Hollow looked at her with pity. The village spoke about that winter for years. Children grew up hearing the story. Travelers carried it beyond the valley. Yet none of those stories captured what mattered most. Because the true ending did not happen in the village square when Cashin knelt before Aloan. It began several weeks later when she finally left Frost Hollow behind. Spring had arrived by then. Snow no longer covered the roads. Streams sparkled beneath clear skies. Wildflowers appeared across the hillsides where winter once ruled. Standing beside the carriage waiting outside her cottage, Aloan looked back one final time. The little house had sheltered her through loneliness, grief, and years of feeling invisible. It would always be part of her story, but it was no longer the entire story. "Ready?" Cashin asked softly. Aloan smiled. "I think I am." Together they climbed into the carriage. The journey north lasted several days. Mountains rose higher with each passing mile. Ancient forests stretched across the horizon. Rivers cut through valleys glittering beneath spring sunlight. The farther they traveled, the more Aloan realized how small her world had once been. Not because Frost Hollow lacked beauty, because she had never been allowed to imagine anything beyond it. Then she saw Noctis Vale. The kingdom seemed carved directly into the mountains themselves. Towers rose from stone cliffs. Bridges crossed deep ravines. Thousands of lights illuminated terraces and gardens overlooking the valley below. It was breathtaking. Yet what surprised Aloan most was not the grandeur. It was the welcome. People smiled when they saw Cashin. They greeted him with genuine affection. And when he introduced Aloan, they treated her with warmth and respect. No suspicious glances. No whispered rumors. No careful distance. Just kindness. The feeling almost overwhelmed her. Days passed quickly. Aloan explored libraries filled with ancient books, gardens blooming with flowers she had never seen, grand halls lined with artwork centuries old. Everywhere she looked, history surrounded her. Yet one place fascinated her more than any other: the Hall of Kings. It stretched through the heart of the castle like a living timeline. Portraits lined both walls from floor to ceiling. Rulers from centuries past watched silently from gilded frames. One afternoon, Cashin guided her there personally. Sunlight streamed through towering stained glass windows. The entire hall glowed with color. "Why did you bring me here?" Aloan asked. Cashin's expression held a mystery she had learned to recognize. "Because there is something you deserve to see." They walked deeper into the gallery, past generations of kings and queens, past warriors, scholars, and leaders whose names filled history books. Then Aloan stopped. Her breath caught instantly. One portrait stood apart from the others, not because it was larger, because of the woman inside it. She looked astonishingly familiar. The same soft features, the same eyes, the same quiet strength. Aloan stepped closer. "She looks like you," Cashin finished gently. A plaque beneath the painting carried a name: Eleanor Hartwell, dated nearly 300 years earlier. Aloan stared in disbelief. "A Hartwell?" Cashin nodded. "Your ancestor." Before she could respond, an elderly archivist approached carrying a carefully preserved wooden case. "My lord," he said respectfully, "the document you requested." Cashin accepted it and handed it directly to Aloan. Inside rested a collection of fragile letters protected beneath glass. The handwriting had faded with time, but remained readable. Aloan slowly turned the pages. The story unfolded piece by piece. 3 centuries earlier, a terrible winter storm had trapped a young traveler in the mountains. He had been injured, alone, far from help. A village woman named Eleanor Hartwell found him and brought him home despite having little herself. She cared for him through the winter and saved his life. Aloan's heart pounded as she continued reading. The traveler eventually became one of the most respected rulers in the history of Noctis Vale. His final letter appeared at the end of the collection. Aloan read the final paragraph aloud. "If kindness ever returns to my bloodline, may my descendants honor it. May they never forget that a single act of compassion can change the course of countless lives." Silence filled the hall. Aloan slowly lowered the letter. "This happened before." "Yes," Cashin said quietly. "Long before either of us were born." She looked from the portrait to the letter and back again. "Do you think this is destiny?" Cashin considered the question carefully. Then he smiled. "I think people often call something destiny when they do not know how else to explain it." They stood together in the quiet hall. Sunlight painted colors across the marble floor. Finally Cashin added, "Perhaps it is simpler than that." Aloan looked at him. "How?" His silver eyes softened. "Perhaps kindness always finds its way home." The words settled deep within her heart. Not because they sounded magical, because they felt true. Later that evening, Aloan stood on a balcony overlooking the kingdom. Thousands of lights shimmered below like stars scattered across the mountains. For the first time in her life, she felt completely certain of where she belonged. Not because a king had chosen her, not because an ancient letter existed, because she had finally learned her worth never depended on the opinions of people who failed to see it. Behind her, the castle bells rang softly in the distance. Ahead stretched a future brighter than anything she had imagined. Then a sudden breeze swept across the balcony. Far below, deep within the castle archives, an ancient book resting untouched on a shelf slowly opened by itself. Its pages turned without a hand touching them. One page stopped near the center. A single name appeared in faded ink: Aloan Hartwell. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the candlelight, a mystery older than any of them had just begun to awaken.